The story of Yakov Yurovsky's diary begins with a discovery that many believe was never meant to come to light. In 2024, inside the quiet and dim storage rooms of a historical archive in Ekaterinburg, Russia, an old wooden crate was opened for the first time in decades. The crate carried the faded label of the Euro-Regional Soviet, an authority deeply tied to the final days of the Russian Empire. Inside were rusted tools, loose revolutionary papers. At the very bottom, a leather-bound notebook. Time had cracked its cover and weakened its pages, but the name written inside was still clear. Yakov Yurovsky. He was a man responsible for overseeing the execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his family in July 1918. At first, the diary seemed like another historical artifact, something scholars believed they already understood. But as the pages were examined, it became clear this was not an official report or a carefully edited memoir. It was raw, personal, and deeply unsettling. What made the discovery truly chilling was not only Yurovsky's private thoughts, but a folded telegram hidden between 2 pages dated the night before the Romanov family was killed. The telegram was short, coded, and cold. It carried instructions that suggested the execution was not a local decision, but an order that came from higher power. If authentic, this document would challenge more than a century of accepted history. It would mean the Romanovs were not simply victims of chaos, but targets of a carefully controlled command meant to erase them completely. The diary does not read like a victory record of revolution. Instead, it feels like a confession written by a man who followed orders and spent the rest of his life haunted by them. From the moment this diary surfaced, historians realized they were facing a document that could reshape how the world understands one of history's darkest nights. To understand a diary, one must first understand the man who wrote it. Yakov Yurovsky was born in 1878 in Siberia to a Jewish family that lived under strict discrimination in Imperial Russia. From an early age, he witnessed inequality, fear, and exclusion. These experiences shaped his political beliefs and pushed him toward revolutionary ideas. Like many who joined the Bolsheviks, Yurovsky believed the old system was cruel and broken. He believed revolution would bring fairness and dignity to people who had long suffered. Yet even among revolutionaries, Yurovsky stood apart. He was quiet, disciplined, and deeply serious. Those who worked with him described him as efficient and emotionally distant. He did not speak much, but when he acted with precision. This made him the perfect choice to oversee sensitive tasks that required loyalty and silence. When the Romanov family was moved to Ekaterinburg after the Bolshevik takeover, Yurovsky was placed in charge of their imprisonment at the Ipatiev house. Officially, his role was to guard them. Unofficially, he was there to ensure no mistakes were made. In his diary, Yurovsky writes about walking the halls of the house at night, feeling a heavy presence long before the executions occurred. He describes the Romanovs not as symbols of power, but as a family stripped of titles and trapped behind locked doors. He notes the children's behavior, especially Anastasia's curiosity and Alexei's weakness. These details suggest that even before the order came, Yurovsky was already struggling with the human reality of his assignment. He believed in the revolution, but the diary shows a man slowly realizing that belief does not erase consequence. The closer he came to carrying out his duty, the more his private thoughts revealed doubt and unease. The most disturbing element of Yurovsky's diary is the coded telegram hidden within its pages. Dated July 16, 1918, the message was brief but powerful. When decoded, it read, "Proceed with implementation. No exceptions. Remove all evidence. The heirs must not awaken." At the bottom was a single letter, V. No name, no signature, only authority. For decades, Soviet history insisted that the decision to execute the Romanovs was made locally by the Euro-Regional Soviet, driven by fear that the White Army would rescue them. However, historians have long suspected that the order came from Moscow, possibly approved by Vladimir Lenin himself. No written proof had ever been found until this telegram appeared. Experts who examined the document noted that its coding style matched Bolshevik military communications used during the Russian Civil War. The wording was formal, distant, and absolute. It did not read like a suggestion or emergency response. It read like a command. In the diary, Yurovsky does not openly name the sender, but his tone changes sharply after the telegram's appearance. His handwriting becomes rushed and uneven. He writes that confirmation came from above, and that silence was expected by morning. The diary suggests that Yurovsky understood the message clearly. The Romanovs were not to be moved, hidden, or exchanged. They were to be erased entirely. The phrase, "the heirs must not awaken," is especially chilling, implying not only death, but the complete destruction of any future claim to the throne. Whether the letter V refers to Lenin or another powerful figure, the diary makes one thing clear. Yurovsky believed the order did not originate with him. He saw himself as a tool of authority, carrying out instructions that could not be questioned. Yurovsky's account of the execution itself is one of the most disturbing historical descriptions ever recorded. According to the diary, the Romanov family was awakened shortly after 1 a.m. and told they were being moved for their safety. Tsar Nicholas asked a simple question, one that still echoes through history. "Where are we going?" Yurovsky answered calmly and led them into the basement. The room was small, damp, and poorly lit. The family stood together. Nicholas and Alexandra at the center, their children close by, and a few loyal attendants nearby. Yurovsky writes that he expected chaos or resistance. Instead, there was confusion and silence. When the order was read, Nicholas barely had time to react before gunfire filled the room. The execution was supposed to be quick, but it was not. Smoke from the guns filled the basement, making it difficult to see. Bullets ricocheted off hidden jewels, sewn into the daughter's clothing. Screams followed. Yurovsky admits he had not prepared himself for sound. He describes how Alexei survived the first shots and how he himself stepped forward to finish the task. At one point, the diary pauses, as if the writer could not continue. When the writing resumes, the tone becomes mechanical, almost emotionless, as though he was forcing himself to document events without feeling them. The entire process lasted nearly 20 minutes. When it was over, silence returned, heavier than before. Yurovsky writes that the basement felt changed, as if the walls themselves had absorbed what happened there. It was not victory, he felt, but something far worse, a realization that obedience had come at a cost he would never escape. After the execution, the diary reveals a frantic effort to erase all evidence. The bodies were wrapped, transported, and hidden in remote locations. Acid was used to damage identifying features. The basement was scrubbed clean. Bullet holes were plastered over. Official reports were sent to Moscow, written in cold, careful language that stripped away all chaos and suffering. Publicly, the Soviet government announced that Tsar Nicholas had been executed, while his family had been moved for safety. It was a lie meant to control panic and avoid international outrage. Privately, Yurovsky and his men lived with what they had done. According to the diary, no one celebrated. They drank in silence. Some refused to speak at all. One man muttered that they would be haunted for the rest of their lives. Yurovsky himself wrote that sleep became difficult. When he did sleep, dreams were filled with gunfire and faces staring back at him. He believed the revolution demanded silence, but silence became its own punishment. The diary suggests that secrecy was not just a political choice, but a psychological burden placed on every man involved. The state moved on quickly. Yurovsky was reassigned other posts and continued to serve the Soviet system. On paper, he remained loyal. In private, his words reveal a growing distance between what he believed and what he had done. As the diary continues, it becomes less about history and more about psychological collapse. Yurovsky describes recurring visions of the Romanov children, especially Anastasia. He writes that she appeared in the corner of his room, not angry, but questioning. Other executioners were not spared either. Letters found within the diary reveal that several members of the execution squad suffered deeply. One soldier wrote that he could no longer sleep and had turned to alcohol to quiet his memories. Another confessed that he burned his uniform because the smell of smoke never left it. One of the most tragic letters came from a man who later took his own life. He wrote that enemies do not beg like that, and enemies do not cry for their mothers. These letters paint a picture of men destroyed by the very act they were told was necessary. The revolution promised purpose, but delivered emptiness. Yurovsky's own reflections grow darker. He writes that the revolution did not remove God, but replaced faith with ghosts. His belief in justice did not vanish, but it fractured. He began to question whether the act of killing a family truly ended tyranny, or simply changed its form. These passages are important because they challenge the idea that ideology alone can protect a person from moral consequence. The diary shows that even those who fully believe in the cause were not immune to guilt. Yurovsky did not face punishment for his role in the execution. Instead, he continued working for the Soviet state, holding various administrative positions. He lived quietly and avoided public discussion of the Romanovs. Officially, he remained a loyal servant of the revolution until his death in 1938. Yet the diary shows that time did not heal him. His handwriting deteriorated. His sentences grew shorter. He returned repeatedly to the idea of obedience. In one entry, he wrote that history would say they killed the Romanovs, but truth would say they obeyed. This distinction haunted him. He seemed to believe that obedience explained his actions, but did not excuse them. In later entries, he referred to the telegram as the seed of silence, suggesting that the coded order was designed to remove humanity from the act itself. By reducing life to instructions, the system made killing easier, but living afterward impossible. These reflections reveal a man trapped between belief and regret, unable to fully condemn the revolution, yet unable to forgive himself. When historians examine the rediscovered diary, they face a difficult decision. If released, it could challenge long-held narratives and reopen painful debates. If hidden, it would repeat the very secrecy the diary condemned. Many scholars believe the diary's value lies not only in what it reveals about the Romanovs, but in what it shows about power and obedience. The document does not present Yurovsky as a monster, nor does it absolve him. Instead, it shows how systems turn ordinary men into instruments of irreversible actions. The telegram, whether definitively proven or not, symbolizes how authority distances itself from consequence. The diary forces readers to confront uncomfortable questions. Who is responsible when orders are followed? Where does personal morality end and duty begin? These questions are not limited to 1918. They echo through modern history. Yurovsky's story is ultimately a warning about revolutions that lose their moral center. He believed he was helping create a fairer world, yet his actions helped build a system that thrived on silence and fear. The diary shows how certainty can become blindness, and how belief can justify cruelty. Yurovsky's final reflections suggest he understood this too late. He wrote that revolutions do not erase injustice, they reshape it. His words challenge the idea that history is driven only by heroes and villains. Instead, it is shaped by people who obey, compromise, and rationalize. The Romanov execution becomes not just an event, but a symbol of how power operates when accountability disappears. The final words in Yurovsky's diary are simple and devastating. They told me to make history. I made ghosts. These words capture the entire meaning of the document. They reflect a man who followed orders, believed in a cause, and paid the price with a lifetime of unrest. The diary does not seek forgiveness, nor does it offer excuses. It stands as a record of obedience and its consequences. For modern readers, it serves as a mirror, asking us to examine how easily responsibility can be passed upward, and how deeply it still lives within those who act. The Romanovs died in a basement, but the echoes of that night followed their executioner to his grave. History may remember events, but diaries like this remind us that behind every order is a human hand, trembling. Before it acts, IT began with a discovery no one was ever supposed to find. In 2024, deep inside a quiet archive in Ekaterinburg, Russia, an old wooden crate was opened after decades of silence. The label on the crate was faded, but still readable. It belonged to the Euro-Regional Soviet, the same authority connected to one of the darkest moments in Russian history. Inside the crate were scattered papers, rusted tools, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound notebook. Its cover was cracked. Its pages were fragile. But the name written inside was unmistakable. Yakov Yurovsky, the man who oversaw the execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his entire family. At first, archivists believed it was just another historical document. But as they turned the pages, they realized they were not reading official history. They were reading a confession. What made the diary truly disturbing was not just Yurovsky's personal thoughts. Hidden between 2 pages dated July 16, 1918, the night before the Romanovs were killed, was a folded telegram. The paper was yellowed, the ink was faint, but the message was clear enough to send chills through anyone who read it. Proceed with implementation. No exceptions. Remove all evidence. The heirs must not awaken. There was no signature, only a single letter at the bottom. V. If this telegram is real, it changes everything we thought we knew. It suggests the Romanovs were not killed because of chaos or fear. They were erased because of an order. Understand why this matters. We must understand who Yakov Yurovsky really was. Born in 1878 in Siberia, Yurovsky grew up in a Jewish family under the harsh rule of the Russian Empire. His people faced discrimination, violence, and constant fear. Like many others, he believed the system needed to be destroyed. When the Bolshevik Revolution came, Yurovsky embraced it fully. He believed it would bring justice and equality. But even among revolutionaries, he was different. Quiet, disciplined, precise. He did not talk about emotion. He followed orders. This made him valuable. When the Romanov family was moved to Ekaterinburg after the Bolsheviks took power, Yurovsky was chosen to guard them at the Ipatov house. Officially, his job was security. Unofficially, his job was silence. In his diary, Yurovsky describes the Romanovs not as rulers, but as a family trapped behind locked doors. He writes about Tsar Nicholas walking quietly, about Alexander's fragile health, about the children, especially Anastasia, who he described as curious and unafraid. These details matter because they show something unexpected. Yurovsky did not see monsters. He saw people. And that is where his conflict began. He believed in the revolution, but the diary shows a man slowly breaking under the weight of what belief demanded from him. Everything changed with the telegram. According to historians, no written order to execute the Romanovs has ever been officially found. Soviet records always claim the decision was made locally by the Euro-Soviet, but this telegram suggests confirmation came from above. The coded language matched Bolshevik military communications used during the Russian Civil War. The tone was cold and absolute. It was not a discussion. It was a command. In the diary, Yurovsky never directly names the sender, but after the telegram appears, his handwriting changes. His sentences become rushed. He writes that confirmation came from Moscow and that silence was expected by morning. The phrase, "the heirs must not awaken," appears again and again in his notes, as if it burned itself into his mind. Yurovsky understood what the message meant. This was not just about killing a former czar. It was about ending a bloodline, erasing a future. The revolution did not want symbols. It wanted certainty, and certainty required finality. In his diary, Yurovsky writes that he tried to destroy the telegram after the execution, but could not bring himself to do it. To burn it, he wrote, would be to erase the truth. Those words suggest something powerful. Even as a loyal revolutionary, Yurovsky wanted history to know that he did not act alone. He obeyed as the night of July 17th approached. The diary grows darker. Yurovsky writes about sleepless nights and heavy silence inside the Ipatov house. He describes walking the halls, feeling as though the walls themselves were watching. He knew what was coming. He knew the family trusted him to some extent, and yet he also believed disobedience was impossible. The revolution did not allow hesitation. It demanded action. And so, just after 1 a.m., he woke the Romanovs and told them they were being moved for their safety. Tsar Nicholas asked a simple question. "Where are we going?" Yurovsky led them to the basement. What happened next would become one of the most horrifying moments of the 20th century. But the version recorded in history books is clean and brief. The version written in Yurovsky's diary is something else entirely. The diary entry for July 17, 1918, begins with a sentence that feels almost calm. They told us it would be quick. Yakov Yurovsky wrote those words before describing the longest night of his life. According to his account, it was just after 1:10 a.m. when he ordered the Romanov family to wake up. He told them they were being moved for their own safety because fighting in the city was getting closer. Tsar Nicholas did not argue. He simply asked where they were going. Yurovsky answered quietly and led them downstairs. The basement room was small, with low ceilings and rough walls. A single light bulb hung from above. The family stood close together. Nicholas and Alexandra at the center, their children nearby. Alexei was weak and had to be carried. Yurovsky noted how calm they seemed, as if they still believed someone would protect them. That belief would end within seconds. Yurovsky wrote that he read the order quickly. He did not explain much. He said their relatives had attacked the Soviet state and that the decision had been made. Nicholas barely had time to react. The diary says he turned slightly, confused, and then the room exploded with gunfire. What followed was not the clean execution history books describe. Smoke filled the basement. The men could not see clearly. Bullets bounced off the walls and off something else. Later, they realized jewels had been sewn into the daughter's clothing, stopping some of the shots. Screaming filled the room. Yurovsky admitted he had not expected the screaming. He wrote that sound would stay with him forever. The execution dragged on. Alexei was still alive after the first volley. Yurovsky stepped forward himself. In the diary, there's a break in the writing at this moment, as if he could not bring himself to continue. When the text resumes, his words are colder and more mechanical. He describes the task, not the feeling. It took nearly 20 minutes before silence returned to the basement. Maria and Anastasia survived the first shots and were attacked with bayonets. Yurovsky wrote, "There are no words or sounds." That line stands alone on the page. When it was over, the room felt changed, not relieved, not victorious, just empty. Afterward, Yurovsky ordered the bodies removed. They were wrapped and taken away under cover of darkness. Acid was used. The remains were hidden in the forests and mines of the Ural region. Back at the Ipatiev house, the basement was scrubbed clean. Bullet holes were filled. Blood was washed away. By morning, it was as if nothing had happened. That was the goal. The telegram had been clear. Remove all evidence. Yurovsky followed the order exactly. Later that day, he sent a short, emotionless report to Moscow. It said the task was completed. No screams, no chaos, just obedience. But the diary tells another story. In the days that followed, Yurovsky wrote about silence becoming his punishment. He could not sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw faces. He heard echoes of gunfire. Other men were breaking too. Some drank heavily. Some refused to speak at all. One reportedly said they would be haunted forever. Yurovsky wrote that none of them celebrated. The revolution had demanded silence, and silence was what they were given. But silence did not bring peace. As weeks passed, letters began to appear inside the diary. They were written by members of the execution squad. One soldier wrote that he could no longer sleep because every night he saw the children's faces. Another said he burned his uniform because the smell of smoke never left it. One letter was especially disturbing. It came from a man who later died by suicide. He wrote, "Enemies do not beg like that. Enemies do not cry for their mother. What have we done?" Yurovsky never wrote a response in the diary, but he kept the letter. He kept all of them. Yurovsky continued working for the Soviet state. On paper, he remained loyal. He took new positions. He followed new orders. He never spoke publicly about the Romanovs again. But his diary shows a man slowly unraveling. His handwriting worsened. His sentences grew shorter. He returned again and again to the idea of obedience. "History will say we killed them," he wrote. "Truth will say we obeyed." That line appears multiple times, as if he was trying to convince himself. Years later, he wrote about the telegram one last time. He called it the seed of silence. He believed its purpose was not just to give an order, but to remove humanity from the act. Words like implementation and no witnesses, he wrote, were designed to make men forget they were killing people. They were designed to turn murder into procedure. That realization haunted him more than the gunfire. Near the end of his life, Yurovsky wrote one final reflection. "They told me to make history," he wrote. "I made ghosts." Those words were found written on the back cover of the diary, barely legible. They capture everything. The obedience, The guilt, the silence, the ghost that followed him until his death in 1938. The diary does not ask for forgiveness. It does not excuse what was done. It simply records the cost of obedience. The Romanovs died in a basement, but their shadows followed the men who killed them for the rest of their lives. And perhaps that is the most disturbing truth of all. When news of the Romanovs' death began to spread, it did not arrive with clarity or honesty. Instead, it came wrapped in confusion, half-truths, and silence. The Soviet government announced that Tsar Nicholas II had been executed, but they said nothing about Alexandra or the children. This was not a mistake. It was a strategy. Yakov Yurovsky's diary explains why. He wrote that Moscow feared the reaction of the world. Killing a king was one thing. Killing a sick boy and 4 young girls was another. So the truth was hidden carefully and deliberately. The telegram that ordered the execution had also ordered secrecy afterward. The lie was part of the plan. Across Europe, royal families waited for answers. Letters were sent. Requests were made through diplomats and neutral countries. Some believed the family had been moved again. Others hoped they were alive somewhere under guard. Rumors began to grow almost immediately. Some claimed the daughters had escaped. Others said Alexei was hidden because of his illness. Yurovsky noted in his diary that these rumors annoyed officials in Moscow, but he also wrote something surprising. He said the rumors brought him fear. If people kept searching, the truth might come out. If the truth came out, the ghosts would return louder than before. The Soviet leadership encouraged the confusion. Newspapers printed vague statements. Officials avoided direct answers. Over time, the story shifted again. Now it was claimed the entire family had died, but no details were given. No bodies were shown. No graves were revealed. This silence allowed myths to grow. Women across Europe and America later claimed to be Grand Duchess Anastasia. Some truly believed it. Others used the story for attention or money. But the reason these stories lasted so long, Yurovsky believed, was